The sun was setting over the suburban streets of Connecticut as I stared at my laptop screen, trying to process what had just happened. My own brother, Wesley Pierce, had hired a private investigator to dig into my life, hoping to expose me as the family failure. Instead, he'd uncovered something that would shake our family's foundation: my quiet success in the tech world, worth millions. Growing up in our middle-class neighborhood, where everyone knew each other's business, was both a blessing and a curse. Our father, Harrison Pierce, was the definition of old school, a man who worked hard and kept his emotions locked away like a safe deposit box. Now in his late 60s, he's thinking about retirement. Mom, Eleanor, is his complete opposite, a traditionalist who's devoted her life to maintaining our family's image in the community. Both come from deeply religious backgrounds, and while I love them, I've always felt like the square peg trying to fit into their round hole of expectations. Wesley, my older brother, is their golden child. At 40, he's living what they consider the American dream. Married to a quiet, reserved woman, with two sports-obsessed sons who are always roughhousing around the neighborhood. Working as a car salesman at the local dealership, Wesley's taken it upon himself to be my life coach, treating me like some sort of project he needs to fix. He's constantly talking about his latest sales numbers, his powerboat, his ATVs, as if material possessions are the only measure of success. Every conversation feels less like brotherly advice and more like a showcase of his supposedly perfect life, leaving me feeling more isolated than ever. I was that kid in school, the one who'd tear up too easily, who always had an explanation for why things didn't work out. Sports weren't my thing, and having asthma didn't help. My parents never really understood that asthma was a legitimate medical condition. They'd just tell me to try harder during physical activities. Depression has been my constant companion since childhood, though that's another thing my family refuses to take seriously. While Wesley was throwing perfect spirals on the football field, I was the kid who could barely run a lap without wheezing. My parents never missed an opportunity to compare us, always highlighting how I wasn't as outgoing or successful as my brother. School was tough. I graduated with a mediocre 2.5 GPA. When I dropped out of college in my second year after saving up to attend, it caused what my mother dramatically called a family crisis. Family dynamic. Then there's my younger sister, Autumn. Being the youngest, she was treated like the family princess. I don't know her as well as I should. I moved out when she was still a teenager. She's not a bad person, just somewhat spoiled. Now at 35, married with 3 kids, she tends to echo our parents and Wesley's treatment of me, probably because it's easier than being their next target. I feel a special connection to her middle child. Maybe because being a middle child myself, I recognize the familiar signs of being overlooked. Career path. After leaving college, I embraced my inner nerd wholeheartedly. I found a job at a local comic book and gaming store, which honestly felt like home until it closed 7 years ago. My parents still talk about it like I'm working there, despite telling them countless times it's been closed since 2011. The best part about that job wasn't just being surrounded by comics and games. It was meeting another tech enthusiast who shared my ambitious dreams. Together, we founded an IT support company that eventually caught the attention of a larger corporation. When my business partner decided to sell, I walked away with a combination of cash and stock options that turned out to be quite profitable. I've since started several side projects and made some smart investments, several of which really paid off. Without trying to brag, my net worth is now well over $1 million. Present day. These days, I'm the CTO of a promising startup. Despite my financial success, I live modestly. A comfortable 2-bedroom apartment in a good neighborhood, furnished with second-hand pieces that tell their own stories. My 15-year-old Saturn still runs perfectly fine, even if Wesley smirks every time he sees it. I'm single, but that's more about focusing on my mental health than anything else. I see my therapist regularly and work on managing my depression and asthma. I've also been dealing with some drinking issues, which, like everything else, my parents dismiss as all in your head. But I've managed to build a successful life on my own terms, even if it doesn't fit their definition of success. Sunday dinners. Every Sunday night, I'm expected to join my family for dinner. They live on the other side of the state, making it a 90 to 120-minute drive each way. It consumes half of my weekend. But as Wesley loves to point out, being single and what he calls a mental case means I supposedly have nothing better to do. These dinners are an exercise in patience. For 3 hours, I endure unsolicited advice about finding a wife, starting a family, and becoming a real adult. Or I listen to endless discussions about Wesley's latest big sale at the dealership, which apparently is always the talk of the town. The unspoken implication that I'm some sort of mooch hangs in the air like stale smoke. Missing one of these dinners creates more drama than it's worth, though my therapist often asks why I keep subjecting myself to these weekly ordeals. Family dynamics. My family has a particular talent for minimizing or misrepresenting my achievements. Back in our hometown, people still think I'm working at that long-gone gaming store. Wesley was always seen as the mature, outgoing one with a real career in sales. The constant mockery about my retail background made it increasingly difficult to share the truth about my life and accomplishments with my family. My genuine expertise in technology was often dismissed as playing with computers, while my interest in games and comics was written off as childish hobbies. Whenever I tried to explain my work, Wesley would interrupt, talking over me with his superficial knowledge of tech, while I sat there silently. I was afraid to correct him because doing so meant having to explain my work and defend my expertise. Deep down, I feared they wouldn't value my career path, or that it would somehow change their perception of me. Though I'll admit, I've had my struggles and moments of complete chaos. Investigation, revelation. Everything changed last month when Wesley somehow got his hands on my personal information. He'd hired a private investigator to do what he called a background check on my employment. I suspect he was planning some sort of intervention with our parents. What they discovered instead left them completely blindsided. The investigation revealed my actual net worth, the fact that I wasn't living in some rundown apartment, and other private details about my life. The irony wasn't lost on me. Working in cybersecurity, I received notifications about unauthorized attempts to access my credit report. I traced the breach back to its source, and suddenly everything clicked into place. Now I'm dealing with my family's sudden and unexpected shift in how they view me. It's overwhelming, especially given our history of miscommunication and undervaluation. Counter investigation. The invasion of privacy bothered me so much that I decided to turn the tables. I hired the same private investigation firm to look into Wesley's finances. The results were eye-opening. His seemingly perfect life was built on quicksand. He was living way beyond his means, juggling 3 mortgages on his house, and struggling with significant back taxes owed to the IRS. The investigation also uncovered a file with Child Protective Services, several past DUI arrests, and domestic disturbance calls. While there were no current charges pending, his credit was in shambles. My parents, on the other hand, had little more than what I already knew. They lived modestly and were practical about money. I was so focused on preparing for the confrontation at the next family dinner, hoping for some kind of reckoning, that I didn't even bother to check into my sister's situation. Sunday dinner confrontation. That dinner turned out completely different from what I'd imagined. My parents started treating me with an unsettling kind of reverence, as if I'd suddenly transformed into their new golden child. The change visibly disturbed Wesley. Halfway through dinner, he lost his composure entirely. In a desperate attempt to salvage his reputation, he started bragging about recent sales commissions and a supposed promotion. I just smiled, congratulated him, and then calmly mentioned his IRS troubles and overextended credit. "I'm happy for your recent success, Wesley," I said quietly. "But maybe we should also talk about those 3 mortgages." The whole scene felt surreal. My parents' sudden shift in behavior toward me seemed forced and artificial, making our already complicated family dynamic even more awkward. When Wesley tried to deny everything, I simply pointed out that by using the agency to investigate me, he'd inadvertently suggested the firm. I have to admit, watching his face as I slid a copy of the report across the table felt satisfying, if only briefly. Our parents' dramatic shock and immediate reprimand of Wesley made it clear they understood the implications. Family meltdown. Things quickly spiraled into chaos. The revelation about the investigation, which required my social security number to obtain, sparked an ugly argument that exposed my family's greed and cowardice. My disgust grew as I watched them. Over the next hour, they started hurling accusations at each other. I tried to stay quiet, but occasionally they'd turn their anger toward me. I'd either shrug or respond with a detached, "Okay." My sister's husband, Wesley's wife, and their 5 children watched in horror as our family imploded in a way we'd never seen before. Usually, our gatherings followed a predictable script. My sister sharing updates, Wesley and his wife boasting, Mom making conversation, and Dad complaining in response. But this collapse was unprecedented. Years of suppressed issues erupted into the open, replacing the usual subtle digs about how I should be more like Wesley and man up with stunned silence. Breaking point. Things reached a breaking point when my father and Wesley got into a heated argument. They dredged up 30 years of family grievances, each blaming the other for everything that had gone wrong. Watching this drama unfold in real time, I felt all my negative perceptions about my family being validated. Honestly, I felt sick. Instead of the vindication or triumph you might expect, I realized I'd handled this poorly. By exposing Wesley's troubles, what had I really accomplished? His children now knew about his troubled past, something I'd never intended. Confrontation peak. The situation peaked when Wesley, in a fit of rage, screamed at me, "You should have never been born." The words hung in the air like poison. What struck me most wasn't just his cruel outburst, but our parents' desperate attempts to calm him, a level of concern I'd never seen them show for me. He blamed me for being the source of all the family's problems. While they tried to intervene, they never actually acknowledged or took responsibility for how they'd treated me over the years. I felt simultaneously vindicated and deeply saddened. It was a harsh reminder of the fundamental problems in our family dynamics. Accusations. The accusations kept coming until I couldn't take it anymore. My parents implied I had refused to help with a sick niece or nephew, a situation I'd never even heard about. No one had ever approached me for help or mentioned any medical issues. I suspected they were making things up on the spot, but instead of calling them out, I simply said, "I thought you believed I was still working at the comic book shop." They'd never seemed to grasp that the store had closed in 2011, despite my numerous reminders. The way they were rewriting our family history to fit their narrative was astounding. I drove home that night feeling overwhelmed and frustrated. Internal conflict. Now I'm caught in a complicated emotional maze. Knowing they'll likely pressure me for money now that they're aware of my wealth makes me feel manipulated. I've seen how they treated Wesley in similar situations. Yet I also acknowledge and appreciate that my parents provided for my basic needs growing up: food, shelter, clothing. Navigating this labyrinth of gratitude, resentment, and newly established boundaries will be challenging. I'll definitely need my therapist's help processing this shift in dynamics. It's clear that setting firm boundaries going forward will be crucial. Childhood reflections. Growing up was tough because, if I'm being honest, I was never the favorite child. Wesley's mistreatment went unchecked. My parents would act as if nothing was wrong when he'd kick, hit, or say horrible things. Verbal abuse wasn't considered real abuse in their eyes. It's particularly painful when the people who are supposed to protect you choose to ignore the harm being done to you. I'm tired of fighting this battle year after year. While I recognize they're my family, I feel the need to maintain a permanent distance. I wish them well, but I think it's time for me to move forward and start a new chapter without them. Future concerns. What happens if I meet someone special, like a girlfriend, and we decide to get married and have kids? How will I handle these family issues then? I'm trying to figure out how to navigate this potential future. If I'm not speaking to my family, how do I introduce a new family to my old one? There are so many questions about what lies ahead. Conference meeting. The answer started to take shape at a tech conference. That's where I met Zara Chen, a brilliant cybersecurity expert whose presentation caught my attention not just for its content, but for her magnetic presence. She understood me in a way few others had, smart, grounded, with a love-centered view of family that was tempered by firm boundaries. As our relationship grew, the unspoken question of how to introduce her to my family circus loomed larger. Over many late-night pizza discussions, we strategized how to handle it. Zara even offered to help me navigate these waters, suggesting we start with short, visible, casual meetings. New beginnings. We began with simple coffee dates, easing back into family gatherings with Zara by my side. The first few meetings were predictably awkward. My parents were overly polite and cautious, as if I might disappear at any moment. Wesley seemed to have a lot he wanted to say, but couldn't find the words. The bright spot was my sister Autumn and her kids, especially her middle child, who immediately connected with Zara. Finding balance. These coffee meetings became our new normal, brief forays into family territory with clear boundaries and exit strategies. This approach allowed me to maintain connections without getting tangled in the old dynamics. Surprisingly, it started working. My family gradually adapted to this new arrangement, perhaps realizing it was the only way they could keep me in their lives. They began respecting my boundaries. Future outlook. As things improved, I found myself thinking more about the future. What might life with Zara look like? I envisioned building a family foundation based on mutual respect and care, rather than obligation and guilt. Walking by the lake one summer evening with Zara, I reflected on how far I'd come, from feeling like a family outcast to standing firmly on my own, with a clearer sense of who I am. The contrast was striking. While I know the road ahead might have its challenges, I feel cautiously optimistic. Setting boundaries with my family after meeting Zara wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about making room for new connections and a fulfilling future. Those infamous Sunday dinners still exist, but now they happen on my terms. I attend when I choose to, bring Zara when I want, and we process any issues together. While there's still progress to be made, I found that delicate balance, maintaining family ties without being overwhelmed by them.